Hi, folks. I want to take a moment and talk about difference and the demeaning of difference. And from my perspective, a perspective that other people share, but it's not commonly known, that of the quote-unquote verbal autistic. Um, I'm not particularly high-functioning even. My ability to prioritize or make sense of things, very out of sight, very out of mind, for me. Makes thriving in this current social and economic paradigm very hard. But you see, people are demeaned and devalued constantly for their difference all the time. Um, through no fault of their own, science is showing a vast array of possible inherent brain wiring and neurology. Um, and sadly, many of us don't get a chance to develop a healthy sense of self-identity. Um, we don't get a chance to thrive because there's really no room for us. Um, I'm hypersensory in the five big senses. I could go and explain that there's really more senses than that and break down the different nerve function between pressure and heat and a host of things. Um, this rules out a lot of places I can thrive, especially when mental illness creeps in. See, I'm not only autistic, verbal in this case, but verbal doesn't indicate an ability to get social cues and effectively communicate. It just means I can use words. And it's hard for me to communicate if I'm not face to face with someone. And because I do have mirror neurons that work versus some on the spectrum who've had very low mirror neuron function, when I'm in a group, I easily become overwhelmed and subsume myself to the dominant will. This becomes extremely difficult. And when you throw in mental illness, in my case, complex post-traumatic stress, something from repeat and recurring trauma, um, especially in somebody like me who, even though I could use words, would fail to communicate. So when I was sexually abused by a peer as a child, I told no one. I didn't even think to tell anyone. Um, as far as people who were supposed to support and nurture me, and they certainly tried, I stopped trusting them a long time ago. I was very easily made a scapegoat. It was so easy to create a trigger event that would overwhelm me. And then I would explode. And then the burden of what happened fell squarely on me, even though I was inherently, neurologically disadvantaged. Um, and because of the demeaning of difference and a failure to really understand certain behaviors, uh, certain ways I approach things that are different that people might label as scary or frightening or even crazy. For example, big fan of rubbing my head. Sometimes I will verbalize things out loud. I'm not talking to myself. I'm a very good auditory learner and even a kinetic learner. And these things help me facilitate and processing things. Because in a lot of ways I have a very limited working memory. I have a vast amount of knowledge and information in my head. But my ability to hold it and manipulate it and not subsume to the chaos in my mind is limited. And thus, I'm very easily overwhelmed. And when I'm overwhelmed, you know, that manifests in ways that people are frightened of and scared of. But it's often an expression of just how frightened and scared I am. For example, when I become overwhelmed and I lose my temper, I hate this part of who I am. But I'm beginning to understand it and come to terms with it too. I will say the most horrible things. One might assume, listening to me, that I'm racist or sexist or something else. And I'm far from any of those things. I just have an understanding of how to hurt, to force people away. Because as a child, I was a runner. When I became overwhelmed or scared or frightened, and even as an adult, often I would try to escape that situation. And even though it seems counterintuitive, um, a lot of times folks should have let me. I always came back. Hunger, the need for food, all of these things would eventually bring me home. But when I was cornered, that fight or flight instinct, that adrenaline just hijacking my ability to put together a coherent thought, so many possibilities with every decision I make, it is overwhelming. And so I would attack, and I would use my words. And so even though I didn't believe what I was saying, I would try to cut and harm in the nastiest ways possible just to get people to leave me the hell alone, because I was overwhelmed. Because of chronic bullying, abuse, even a big brother who I do care for, who just didn't get me. I was so gullible and naive and trusting until that eventually broke, and then I just stopped trusting anyone. I ended up hypervigilant on top of hypersensory. And that is a miserable fate, whether you're autism spectrum or not, because you can have some hypersensory functions and still have some decent socialization skills. That's why we have a spectrum. And people are near the spectrum, people are on the spectrum, people are fairly far away from the spectrum. But the demeaning of difference in the attacks quickly allow mental illness to hijack an already extremely difficult fate with this maladaptive and different inherent wiring to the brain. And so I wanted to talk about that and bullying and demeaning difference. I know some folks say that bullying builds character. You get bullied a little bit and you're adapted to the dominant paradigm and you get proper social cues and you can put that in context and perspective. Maybe that builds a little character. Maybe. But when you can't, that can't build character at all. You have no idea what's going on. You're so completely overwhelmed. And so your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the problem-solving center of your brain, gets hijacked into problem-solving yourself. What is wrong with you? Why do you fail? Why are you bad or evil? Do you have the devil in you? Or a host of other possible things can throw up at you. I mean, Christ almighty. And I mean that I'm not particularly religious, but my goodness, I feel he would at least understand this, because there was a guy who was different too. That, why would an elementary school ever deserve to be pinned to the wall by the principal? Because he was overwhelmed and lost control. Why is it okay to demean and bully difference instead of taking the modicum amount of energy to educate people, to understand that if I'm rubbing my head and muttering to myself, I'm not crazy, I'm processing, I'm grounding, I'm de-stressing myself. Why is it abnormal or wrong for me to sit there and just gently sway my hips? Or when I look into somebody's eyes and I pull out so much data from microexpressions? Or I'm forced to ground myself in their view instead of disassociating, because naturally I'm a highly disassociative person. Why does that make me bad? Or make any other kid bad? Matter of fact, I'm not. I'm a hugely caring, and I like to say moral person, because black and white and false dichotomies may seem to fit people's worldview and make life easier, but there's so much more variety. Even if you look at the Myers-Briggs that claims 16 personalities, there are more than 16 possible inherent wirings for the human brain. And so I ask, why do we continue to bully and demean? Why can we not take a moment to educate people and sit here and simply say, there are people out there who think fundamentally, through no fault of their own, very, very differently. Some people are very quick to make a decision. They see something, it makes sense to them, they act. Some people are very rigid. They may see one course of action. Some people may see just a couple courses of actions, then pick or choose a few. Then there are people like me who see so many possibilities, and understanding that the wrong word at the wrong place at the wrong time can cause trauma, can hijack somebody's own sense of self-esteem and self-identity. And I have weaponized this in my fear and in my anger. But for some odd reason, maybe it was proper upbringing, maybe it's mirror neuron function, I still empathize and I still care. I still manage to care about the people who didn't really seem to care about me, who thought it was okay to lock me in things, or chase me, or threaten me, or bait me until I just couldn't handle it and I exploded. Now, like many in my age group and older, I didn't learn about my autism diagnosis until recently. I managed to get by on what has repeatedly been called through my life native intellect. And yes, I'm reasonably intelligent. That doesn't make me highly functional at all. As a matter of fact, I'm extremely chaotic. I can't prioritize on my own. I need external structure, which is why probably the only places I even came close to thriving was as an ammo troop in the United States Air Force, IYAAYAS. Why? Because the military uses you. And the people around me saw some of the things I was capable of and utilized that to make the mission happen. Now, I was still overwhelmed. I was still stressed. I was on active duty in Alaska on September 11th. The toll it took on me resulted in the very fundamental break between my mind and body connection. But once again, that's not my fault. I had no control over this, and especially no control when I had no idea what was going on. But the burden of being different, of being outside the dominant paradigm, falls on those who are different. And that can be a host of things. Autism spectrum disorder is a good point of view for me. But people are demeaned for a host of reasons they have no control over, be it gender or biological sex, or sexual orientation, race, color, ethnicity, native intellect. We continue to demean these things, and we continue to try to apply one-size-fits-all solutions to these things instead of teaching to the difference and making room for all of us to lead fulfilling lives. And when you're mentally healthy, and when you have options, and you can endeavor freely, regardless of your inherent gifts versus your inherent disabilities, you can make a meaningful contribution to the lives of the people around you. And maybe you can't always generate and accrue wealth, which seems to be such an important measure of worth to some people. But we demean those who teach and cannot do. We demean those who might just be simple nurturers. We demean the homemaker. We demean difference. And we fail to understand. We fail to take our own self-assessment and apply it to others. And all you really have to do is just take a few moments to understand that what you are seeing and perceiving is going through your own internal filter, your own inherent epistemology, your inherent way of knowing and thinking. And that person may think very fundamentally different than you. They may approach things from completely different angles, and they may have problems and difficulties you can't even imagine. And I see people being bullied and demeaned for this all the time. So what if a 12-year-old boy wants to be a cheerleader? Has nothing to do with his sexuality, not necessarily. I have many quote-unquote feminine traits. I've learned to put on a very masculine mask over the years. But I'm also heterosexual. No bearing at all on my sexuality. Just happen to be not very masculine, very caring, very compassionate. And so I sit here and I wonder why we have to keep attacking each other, even when we disagree, when we should be attacking the ideas, not the person. The person just didn't get there overnight. We need to embrace and accept difference.